Okay, hi guys, back with the Naruto timeline, which I'm going to go into now. As I mentioned last chapter, basically I'm just going to be reading from the comments and corrections section of the thing that I wrote, which is chapter 3, and I'm going to be putting the visuals of the modified timeline on screen. I'm going to try to keep those in sync, but I can't actually record visuals of the modified timeline at the same time as I have this open. I suppose I might be able to do that if I printed out the comments and corrections, but it's pretty big and you'll forgive me if I don't want to use up that much ink and paper. Anyway, and as I said in the previous video, you also see things that I'm just going to, in the visuals that I'm just going to gloss over for the moment, but those are just comments and things that are further down in the script, I guess you could call it, and which I'm just not getting to yet because it's just the easiest and most efficient way to actually make a video version of this analysis. I mean, for any of the others, I could just straight read them and it wouldn't be a problem, but here I have to sync up visuals, and with here it's like I have to go back into the timeline, fix something in an earlier part of the timeline, go back and forth. And I will also mention that some of these sections are just comments. They were just little comments that I made sometimes because I felt the need to comment on something. Some of them are big discussions, some of them are not, and they're going to be a little weird because some of them, they may not be very much at all, but I just put down thoughts and ideas in different sections, and when I did this originally for myself, it was a Word document and a numbered list, so I didn't want to make those discussions too large for my own ability to read them back. So it's going to be a little weird, but it'll make sense mostly. Anyway, section number 1, the creation of the 0 year and the 5 great Shinobi countries. Sealentau's research put the creation of the Hidden Leaf, and even the Hidden Stone, at 50 years before Naruto was born, with Hidden Sand and Hidden Cloud being formed 6 years later, or 44 BNB, or 6KY, and no word at all on the Hidden Mist. You could start the count of the KY system at when all 5 countries were established, but the year Konoha came into being would work just as well, since it set the standard for the Hidden Village system. I decided to use the same year for my own system, making this 0 KY, plus as a bonus, 50 is a nice round number for calculations. Section number 2, Hashirama's birth year. The Narutopedia articles for Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha say that when they met, they found boys their own age. A Naruto manga chapter 621 and Shippuden episode 367. I looked at both, and while I didn't hear or see them make that exact statement, I could have missed it. In any case, they do look around the same age. Though, to be fair, age can be difficult to pin down for a drawing without any real context. The placement of Hashirama's birth year is therefore only halfway arbitrary. You yourself can think about what kind of margin you'd be able to tolerate to still call someone about your age. In my case, I chose to make Hashirama's birth year the same as Madara's for convenience. Section number 3. Hashirama's marriage year and birth years of his children. This one is total fanon, but not without logical basis. Hashirama says in chapter 622 of the manga that the average life expectancy of people, either ninjas, civilians, or both, in the Warring States period was 30. That being the case, marrying and having kids young would have been very reasonable. Second, Hashirama has a granddaughter before he died. Admittedly, she wasn't very old. Her birth year is in 12 KY. He needs to have kids who are old enough to have kids of their own by that year. Lastly, Tsunade's birth year cannot be changed to alleviate the time crunch. For one, Hashirama's death year has already been set and cannot be pushed forward. See section number 11. For another, in Shippuden 366, Hashirama states that he spoiled his granddaughter and she picked up his gambling habit. This means that by the time Hashirama dies, Tsunade has to be old enough to reasonably be able to do that. 1 year old, for example, would not be reasonable, so Tsunade's birth year cannot be shifted down the timeline, as much as she would be pleased by it. This is also why I decided Hashirama got married to Mito at 16. It's an age that is reasonably old enough to marry, if at the edge of acceptable by modern standards, and fits with the short life expectancy. This is also why I placed the birth of their first child the year after, to move things along efficiently while allowing the necessary time. The fact that Tsunade's mother/other parent is born in the same year is for convenience, though this does not have to be the case for anyone else's writing. Also, with regards to their child/children, I only factored in one child, Tsunade's parent. Hashirama could have easily had others. While I choose to make this child a son in my own writing, this does not necessarily have to be the case. I think that either way, Tsunade could keep the name of Senju. The clan is so big, powerful, and respected in Konoha that even if Hashirama had a daughter, you could easily see her spouse taking the Senju name instead of the other way around, to keep the prestige of the bigger clan. The same sort of logic could apply to Naruto, had his own parents lived. We know nothing of Minato's family. He could have been a clanless shinobi. But either way, the Uzumakis were old and powerful, with their own village and tied to the founding of Konoha. Plus, their heritage was nearly lost. So Naruto could have still been named Uzumaki rather than Namikaze in respect of that. Section number 4. The order of village creation changed. In Shippuden 369, Hashirama talks about the creation of the hidden villages and how more followed after Konoha. He lists the other 4 major villages in a particular order, that order being Kumo, Aiwa, Kiri, and Suna. That order was even taken as literal by someone on Narutopedia, who mentioned the order on the various Kage pages, the Mizukage article, the Raikage article, etc. That would be enough reason to move Sealantao's original placement for the formation of Kumo, but I took another issue and ended up changing that order slightly. The reason is simple. Gengetsu and Onoki. When Gengetsu, the second Mizukage, sees Onoki after being reanimated, he comments, "Don't tell me that's the brat Onoki. Now I really do feel like I've traveled in time." Or something to that effect. He's stated as having made fun of Onoki as a child. He calls him brat. This means Gengetsu met Onoki when the latter was very young. Was this before the era of the hidden villages? That's possible, but less likely in my opinion. It is true that countries hired shinobi clans to fight for them. A filler episode, meaning optional canon, showed the Land of Lightning hiring the Uchiha. That's a distance away, and the Uchiha seem to have been local to the Land of Fire, or at least that's likely given the fire specialization common to the family. But look at the lands of earth and water. They're as far apart as you can get. That sort of distance makes it less likely that ninja from these two areas would cross, that people would hire ninja from so far away, as opposed to more localized groups. Again, not impossible, but improbable. The best way one could work it out is that Earth Country shinobi were hired to counteract water shinobi, since by the chakra nature system, Earth beats water. But it's also true that you don't need to be from Earth Country to use Earth Style / Earth Release. This is why I find it more likely that their interaction was after the hidden villages were established. But that raises another issue. Look at when Onoki's birth year is. It's 12 BKY. He was already 12 when Konoha, the first village, formed. If Aiwa formed third, then how long did that take? If you want to follow the order Hashirama gave and simply move Kumo's creation and Sealantao's timeline, that's 3 villages forming in 1 year. But you can't wait too much longer for Kiri to form, because by 1 KY, Onoki will literally be a teenager. There's only so long you could reasonably call him brat. So Kiri needs to come about very soon after Aiwa. And yet, cramming the creation of 4 villages in 1 year seems wrong. A mistake I made myself in earlier drafts of this timeline. I was willing to let it slide at the time. Things need time to happen. Word of Konoha must travel. People must come together. In Seal and Tao's original timeline, they had the distribution of village creation as 2 in 1 year, 2 in another, and Kiri... Well, Kiri wasn't mentioned, but presumably it was somewhere in between. I wanted to keep Aiwa and Kiri's foundings very close together because I feel Inoki and Gengetsu were more likely to meet post-village system. And also, I like that idea. So, to keep that, and also distribute village creation in a reasonable way, I changed the order to Konoha, Aiwa, Kiri, Kumo, and Suna. Section number 5. The formation of Kumo and the Gold and Silver Brothers. This is where I decided to place the creation of Kumo. The actual placement is arbitrary. The only requirement is that it be between Kiri and Suna. I kept the mission to capture Karama in the same year because that seemed reasonable. Honestly, the placement of the mission, and canon implies it was an official mission, seemed arbitrary in the original timeline. There's no way to pin down exactly what year it happened. It only needs to happen after Kumo formed, for obvious reasons. Section number 6. Gengetsu was a diplomat. As stated in section number 4, the land of water and earth are as far apart from each other as you can get. We know Gengetsu did in fact interact with Onoki and Mu, and he must have done so very early in the era of the hidden villages. But that being the case, why did he go over there? That's an awfully long trip. Whatever the reason, it wasn't hostile. Think about it. Gengetsu teased Onoki. He's a very friendly person, and he could have done it in battle, but for me, it really didn't strike me as hostile interaction. If so, why did Gengetsu go to the land of Earth? The answer is simple. Gengetsu was employed by Kiri to be their diplomatic envoy, either to the land of Earth / Aiwa specifically, or their general envoy. This sort of job fits Gengetsu very well, as he had a very warm, friendly personality, but was also not one to be messed with. It would fit well with him not being a bodyguard at the 5 Kage summit, unlike all the other future second Kage. If a village had newly formed, envoys would be a natural way to go. Aiwa clearly expected Madara to be an envoy, or he was one, more on that in the next section, since they thought he was there for an alliance. He was not. But Madara's utter failure at diplomacy is beside the point. Envoys were a thing, and Gengetsu could have been one. Section number 7. Madara leaving the village. Seal and Tao's original placement for when Madara fought Onoki and Mu is strange, to be honest. They cited the reason as Onoki looking significantly older than he did when he was talking to Ishikawa in episode 332, but Seal and Tao placed the two events only a year apart. Onoki did not look 13 when he faced Madara. He looked much older than that. In addition, it has been pointed out to me how strange it is that there would be this 6-year gap between when Madara left Konoha and when he came back. Shippuden number 369 didn't really indicate any kind of large time skip. I find myself agreeing with this point. You could argue that Madara's rather disastrous meeting in Aiwa should probably be one of the last things he did before he left. Aiwa expected an alliance. Madara demanded that Aiwa submit to Konoha's authority. Both of these things would indicate he hadn't left yet. If Madara had already left, then why would Aiwa think he was there officially, unless word just hadn't reached them yet? If Madara had left, why would he be going out of his way to get Aiwa to submit to the village when he'd lost all authority? I suppose he could still have, but it seems wonky to me. Madara was clearly angry with Hashirama during that meeting, as he didn't want to hear Hashirama's name, so this meeting happened after he got snubbed. For these reasons, I decided to move Madara's fight with Mu and Onoki, as well as his departure, up several years to 6KY. For one, Onoki would be 17 to 18 this year, which fits the age he appears to be. It's also stated that the ninja training institution was created after Madara left, but before his greatly exaggerated death. The institution came around in 7KY. The delay between his departure and his attacks is merely inserting time for him to both decide to go back and take over, as well as time for him to not only capture, but find Kurama. Canon says that Kurama lived in the Fire Country, but it's still a big place, and Madara would have to locate him first and get there. The period of time for Madara's attacks is to account for possible recovery time and or wanting to space out his attacks. Section number 8. The problems of the First Shinobi World War, SWW1, cramming too much in, and the moving of the summit. SWW1 was the first real wrinkle I noticed in Sealant House timeline when I found it. Look at their timeline. Year 16 KY or 34 BNB. Look at what happens there. The first Kage summit is held. Hashirama gives away / sells tailed beasts to the other great nations. The First Shinobi World War breaks out. Hashirama dies. Tobirama becomes second Hokage. In fact, all of the first Kage present at this meeting die. The second Mizukage and Tsuchikage kill each other. The second Raikage dies. All 5 of the great nations lose 2 of their military leaders, except for Suna, who, as far as we know, only loses 1. A peace treaty is attempted between Konoha and Kumo, and that goes sideways. The Leaf Police are created, and finally, the war ends. All of these events, this entire continental war that left nations devastated, all happened in 1 calendar year. The war itself was less than 1 calendar year. And in my opinion, that's way too cramped. Events, especially world events like this, need time to breathe, and war of this scale can't be over that quickly. Not between 5 powerful nations of what presumes was nearly equal power. Now, you could argue about superpowered ninja gods sweeping armies, or how SWW4 was 2 days long. For one, the length of SWW4 does bug me a bit, though to be fair, it wasn't standard warfare. It was 5 nations ganging up on a lunatic with an army of monsters, not nations battling each other trying to take territory. I could also point out that there's no way to tell how long there was between Tobi's declaration of war and when it actually started. It could have been months, and the Allied Shinobi forces would have needed time to coordinate. In SWW3, Minato defeated 1,000 Iwa Shinobi in one battle, and yet the war still lasted a few years, not 1. In addition, the Kanabi Bridge was a target in that war because it was a vital pathway for Iwagakure's line of supply. This means that, yes, despite the superpowers and whatnot, the shinobi of Naruto's world still employ basic military strategy, like supply lines. SWW2 also lasted several years, though it too is cramped in certain ways I will get to further down the line. The point is, putting a war like this, with these results and everything else, the peace treaty, the Leaf Police, in less than 1 year is bizarre, cramped, and ridiculous. And honestly, when I look at this particular year and the data points around it, I think the reason all these events are placed here is not to demonstrate the devastation or hype up God like ninjas or whatever, but because there was nowhere else for these events to go. The Hidden Village system is extremely young. Sealant House said the founding of Konoha a mere 50 years before Naruto was born. And not only did he said it there because canon dictated that it was 50 years before Naruto was born. But in that time frame, there were supposed to have been 3 world wars. That would be difficult to fit together, but then you have factoids like there being a 20-year peace period between the first and second wars. That's 40% of your allotted time eaten up from the get-go. In the frantic process of making the series and creating its history, Kishimoto ended up cramming way too much into way too little, like a person who packs their suitcase so badly it's ready to burst at the seams. Another way this result impacts the story is with regards to the second Kages. If things play out like this, it means that Tobirama, Gengetsu, Mu, and A II were all in office for less than 1 year, which is rather sad. By all accounts, poor Minato at least got to wear the hat for around a full year before he died. These guys? They'd barely have time to be more than a footnote. It was just one bad year to be a village leader. For these reasons, I chose to try and loosen up the events of the war as much as I could, while trying to stay true to the original idea. It's not perfect, but the problem is at least mitigated. This is why I set the first Kage summit a few years before the war. As a point of curiosity, the first data book says that SWW1 broke out after Tobirama took over, but this was later retconned in the fourth data book, which said the summit happened during a world war. The only choice would be SWW1. Ironically, the first data book ended up being more reasonable than the fourth. The summit cannot happen during a world war. The summit was held to ease rising tensions, to have ended minor conflicts. If the war was already in progress, then how on earth would it be a smart idea to give away / sell your enemies giant destructive chakra monsters? Do you expect them not to use them on you? You're handing them heavy artillery. Also, if the whole thing happened in 1 year, does that mean the 5 Kage walked out of the meeting and decided, hey, you guys want to go to war? Tensions need time to build. Section number 9. Ishikawa, the first Tsuchikage's death. In an effort to mitigate the super high death count among the military leaders for this war just a wee bit, as well as give some of the second Kage more time in office, I decided that Ishikawa, the first Tsuchikage, died this year of age-related reasons and not from battle. Of the 5 first Kages that attended the summit, Ishikawa and Byakuren, the first Mizukage, were rather old-looking men and appeared to be the most elderly of the entire group, making death by natural causes more likely. Before you object, however, remember that even powerful characters have died of things other than battle, a subject I will touch on later. Giving Mu a little more time in office also helps with his backstory, since it was stated that he searched for other tailed beasts, and that happened during his time as Tsuchikage. He's less likely to do that, or do it himself, in the middle of a large-scale war. Section number 10. Byakuren, the first Mizukage's death. As stated above, or right before this in video format, it is more likely that he and Ishikawa could have died of age-related problems. That Byakuren died after Ishikawa and the Gengetsu got less time in office than Mu is deliberate. In the battle with the allied Shinobi forces, Gengetsu is frustrated that ninja from his own village know very little about him. He blames the hidden mist's habit of secrecy for this, but also says, "If I'd known it was going to be like this, I would have left a bigger legacy / legend." This implies to me that his time in office was fairly short. Shorter than Mu, at least. Section number 11. Hashirama Senju's death. No one knows how Hashirama died, but canon data says it was 50 years before Part 2, which would place it in this year. I have already mentioned in section number 3 about how Tsunade needs to be old enough to pick up Hashirama's gambling habit before he dies. Age 4 seems reasonable, though since her birthday is so late in the year, it would probably be 3 to 4, and it is in my case, but that's the best we can do. I put Hashirama's death very early in the year to allow Tobirama more time in office, and also give him some time before the war starts. As far as Hashirama's cause of death, while he certainly wasn't as old as Ishikawa or Byakuren, Hashirama was made out to be so incredibly powerful that I honestly have a hard time imagining any combat scenario that could result in his death. You can't even use age as an excuse because, as you can see, the estimates would place him as dying somewhere in his early or maybe mid-40s, depending on how big an age gap you allow between him and Madara. That's old, certainly, but not especially old. The easiest way, then, narratively speaking, is disease. It's also not outlandish, as both Kimimaro and Itachi died of unknown but terminal illnesses. So why not Hashirama too? If you're an Ace Attorney fan, you could even jokingly say that they came down with incuritis. Section number 12. The formation of the Leaf Police. This is another reason why I favor the idea of Tobirama having at least some time in office before the war. Devoting resources to create the Leaf Police strikes me as something you might be less likely to do in the middle of a large conflict. It's not impossible, mind you. It could have been created to maintain domestic order in the wake of the foreign chaos. I just see it as a little less probable. The creation of the Leaf Police could have also been done in response to the Uchiha getting angry over another Senju becoming Hokage, an idea I've decided to go with.